I started on the warehouse floor. I ended up running the operation. I don't share things like this usually, but someone passed me a link to this place a while back and said, read it when you have time. I read for 2 days straight. These stories kept me company on some hard nights, and I figure I owe one back. Hi, my name is Kayla. I'm 31 years old. I live in Memphis in a two-bedroom condo I own. I have a job I am genuinely good at, friends I actually like, and a life that fits me the way a life is supposed to fit. I got here from a town most people have never heard of, through a warehouse, through a relationship that couldn't survive who I was becoming, and through about a decade of writing things down and figuring it out one step at a time. I'm telling you where it ends before I tell you where it started, because where it started doesn't look anything like this. I grew up in Covington, Tennessee, about 40 miles northeast of Memphis. Small enough that everybody knows your business, familiar enough that you can settle into a routine without anyone pushing you to question it. My parents, Linda and Ray, were not dreamers. They were workers. My mother handled linens at a commercial laundry service. My father drove a delivery truck for a regional grocery distributor. They left early and came home tired, and on weekends they did the things that needed doing. They were good parents, steady and present and kind. The house was not a hard place to grow up in. It was just a place where nobody had ever looked up and asked whether this was the only way things could be. You finished school, you found work, you handled what was in front of you. That was the shape of a life as far as anyone around me had ever described it. I graduated high school at 18 with decent grades and no real plan. My boyfriend Travis, who I had been with since we were both 16, had already gotten a job at a distribution center outside of town. He said they were hiring. I applied. I started the following Monday. The warehouse was loud and physical and relentless. I was tired every day for the first 2 months in a way that sat in my bones. But I was paying attention. I couldn't help it. It was just how my brain worked. I started noticing things almost immediately. Products that sat too long, bottlenecks that backed everything up for hours because nobody had looked at the pattern upstream, the same problems repeating on the same days of the week because nobody had asked why. I started writing observations down in a small notebook I kept in my back pocket, not officially, just because my brain needed somewhere to put it. One afternoon, my floor supervisor, Dennis, who had been there 12 years, caught me making notes during a slow period. He looked at the page for a long time. Then he said, "You know there are people who get paid to think about this stuff?" I asked what he meant. He said, "Supply chain, operations, there's a whole field." He said it like someone pointing at a door he had never opened himself, but I wrote it down that night. Supply chain management. Underneath it, what is it? Underneath that, how? I started looking things up on my phone during breaks. The more I read, the more I recognized. Procurement, inventory optimization, logistics coordination, demand forecasting. It was all a formalized version of what I had been watching on that floor and scribbling in my notebook. I found out that Southwest Tennessee Community College had a logistics and supply chain program, 2 years, an associate's degree, transferable to a 4-year program. I found out that Memphis was one of the biggest logistics hubs in the country. FedEx headquarters, major distribution centers for dozens of companies. I was 40 miles from one of the best cities in America to build a career in exactly this field. I had been standing at the edge of it without knowing. I told Travis I was thinking about enrolling. He listened, then he said it seemed like a lot of school for something I could probably learn on the job. I said I wanted the degree. He said, okay. I remember that word specifically. Okay, like he was approving something that was not his to approve. I noticed it and then I let it go, because I was good at that then. Writing things off. I enrolled at Southwest Tennessee that fall. I kept my warehouse job, dropped to part-time, and took 9 credits a semester. My financial aid covered almost everything. I applied for two small local scholarships through the financial aid office, the kind most students never apply for because they don't know to ask, and got both. I finished my associate's degree with almost no debt. I also learned how to actually study, not just show up and memorize enough to pass. I found tutorials online about active recall and spaced repetition, and I treated studying like a skill to be built rather than a talent you either had or didn't. My grades were strong from the start and got better as I got more deliberate. Travis and I were still together. He was still at the distribution center, full time, picking up overtime when he could, buying a truck, talking about maybe getting a place in Covington. He seemed content. I kept waiting for him to get curious the way I was curious. He never did. When I told him I was transferring to the University of Memphis, he asked if I was sure it was worth it. I said yes. He said it was a long commute from Covington. I told him I was planning to move to Memphis. He nodded slowly and said we would figure it out. I told myself we would figure it out too. I transferred to the University of Memphis Fogelman College of Business junior year. I majored in supply chain management and worked part-time at a small logistics company doing entry-level coordination work. Seeing it in practice made everything click in a way classes alone couldn't. My professor, Dr. Holt, had spent 15 years in supply chain at a major retailer before moving into teaching. He pulled me aside after my first major project and said I had a systems mind. He said, "You see how the pieces connect. Most people only see the piece in front of them." He connected me with a contact at a Memphis firm. I wrote his name down and followed up the same week. I commuted back to Covington on weekends to see Travis for the first several months, then less, then occasionally. He had gotten a small promotion at the distribution center and seemed satisfied. He talked about Covington like the future was already settled. A house, the same job, the same radius. He talked about it like it was a plan we both had. I listened. I said the right things. On the drive back to Memphis, I felt something I kept pushing down because I did not want to look at it yet. One weekend, I came home excited about a demand forecasting model I had built for my operations class. My professor had called it graduate level work. I tried to explain it to Travis. After a few minutes, he said, "You're starting to sound like you think you're better than everyone." His voice was easy, almost joking, but it landed somewhere specific. I said I was just excited. He said he knew he was just saying. Then he moved on. I wrote it down later that night, not to keep score, because writing things down was how I understood them. I looked at the page. I understood something I had been not understanding for a while, but I was not ready to name it yet. So I didn't. I graduated from the University of Memphis at 24 with a degree in supply chain management and an offer from a mid-sized logistics firm in Memphis, starting salary $58,000, supply chain coordinator. I accepted and moved into a studio apartment in Memphis. I bought a used car on a loan I qualified for entirely on my own. I started paying down my student loans with focus. Travis and I had a conversation that had been coming for a long time. I told him I didn't think we were going in the same direction anymore. He said he knew. He didn't fight it. We said goodbye like people who had genuinely meant something to each other. I cried that night, not because I had made the wrong decision, because even right ones have weight. I threw myself into work. I was good at it in the way you are good at something when it lines up with how your brain naturally works. My director, Angela, who had built her own career from an entry-level freight position, became a real mentor. She put my name in rooms I wasn't in yet. She told me when I was wrong and expected me to do better. I earned my certified supply chain professional credential at 26, one of the most recognized in the field, passed on my first attempt. Promoted to supply chain analyst, then senior analyst, then at 29, supply chain manager, a team of 6, $87,000 a year. I also built a life in Memphis that was fully mine. A running group on Saturday mornings along the riverfront, a book club that turned into real friendships, a small church a few blocks from my place, quiet and unpretentious. I dated thoughtfully and without urgency. I took trips. I learned the city the way you learn a city when you choose it on purpose. I bought my condo at 30. Top floor, a view of the city from the living room. I stood in the empty living room the evening I closed and felt something settle in my chest that I did not have words for. I had done this. From Covington, from a warehouse floor, from a back pocket notebook full of questions. All of it mine. The call came on a Tuesday morning. A regional distribution center outside Covington was having serious inventory and logistics problems. Losses were significant. My firm had been brought in to assess and restructure their operations. I was leading the team. I did not think about Travis when I took the assignment. I thought about the work. He was at the distribution center when we arrived. He was a shift lead now, 10 years in. He looked the same, a little harder around the eyes maybe, but the same. He saw me in the conference room through the glass before I saw him. By the time I came out, he was waiting. He was polite at first, asked how I was, said it was wild to see me there. I said it was good to see him. And then something shifted in his face, a tightening. He said, "So you're the one they brought in to fix us." I said I was part of the team, yes. He laughed, but there was nothing warm in it. He said, "Must be nice." I asked what he meant. He said, "You've been gone, 8 years, and you come back running the whole show? Some of us have been here grinding this whole time." I looked at him. I kept my voice even. I said, "Travis, you've been grinding in the same position for a decade. That's not the same as grinding towards something." He said he had worked just as hard as anyone. I believed him. I said working hard and working with direction were two different things. I said the warehouse was never meant to be the destination. It was a starting point. I knew that when I was 19. I tried to show you what I was doing. You said it seemed like a lot. He said not everyone could just go off to school. I said the community college was 20 minutes away and the financial aid covered almost everything. I said I worked part-time through the whole degree. I said the evenings I spent studying were the same evenings you spent watching television, and I am not saying that as an insult. I am saying it as a fact. He didn't say anything. I said, "I don't have anything you couldn't have had. I just made different choices with the same hours we both had." He looked at me for a long moment. Then he walked away. I stood there for a second. Then I went back into the conference room and got back to work. I went to my parents' house for dinner that weekend. My mother made too much food the way she always did. My father talked about the garden. My sister Renee's oldest daughter, who was 12 and sharp in a way that reminds me of myself at that age, asked me what I did for work. I told her. She scrunched her nose and said, "What even is that?" I said it was figuring out how things move from where they're made to where they're needed and making sure it happens as efficiently as possible. She thought about it. Then she said, "So, like solving the puzzle of stuff?" I said, "Yes, exactly like that." She asked if you had to be good at math. I said you had to be willing to get good at math, which was different. Before I left, I wrote down 2 websites on a piece of paper and gave it to her. Khan Academy and a study skills resource I had used when I was learning how to actually learn. I told her the information was free. I told her free was how I started. She folded the paper and put it in her pocket. I drove back to Memphis that night with the windows down. The city came into view the way it always does from the east, lights spread wide against the dark. Familiar and mine. I am 31 years old. I manage a supply chain team in one of the biggest freight hubs in the country. I own my home. I have a life I chose deliberately and built carefully. Travis is still in Covington, as far as I know. I don't think about him with anger. I think about him the way you think about a choice that could have gone differently. He had the same starting point I had, the same hours in the day. He chose differently, and the results reflect that. Somewhere along the way, he decided that was my fault. It wasn't. I still keep notes. On my laptop, on sticky notes, in the margins of reports. The habit never left because it was never about the notebook. It was about paying attention, asking why, writing it down so you can look at it clearly instead of letting it stay blurry. Dennis pointed at a door one Tuesday afternoon and probably doesn't remember doing it, but it landed exactly where I needed it. That is sometimes how it works. Someone points at a door, you're the one who has to walk through it. The warehouse is still there outside Covington. I drove past it on the way to my parents' house that weekend. The loading docks looked the same, the parking lot looked the same. I sat at the stoplight and looked at it and felt nothing complicated. That is where I started. This is where I am. The distance between those two things is every decision I made, every dollar I saved, every evening I spent at a library table when I could have been somewhere easier, every question I wrote down, every answer I went and found. Nobody handed me a map. I made one. You can make one too. Find the door, write down the question, look up the answer, take the class, save the money, give up the evenings that need to be given up, move toward the thing even when the thing feels far away. The steps show up when you start walking. I promise you they do.